I record these sessions because I share them with the people who submit their questions. So if you submit your question and you can't watch live, or you don't want to watch it on Facebook, know that you'll get an email with the link. So I try to do that. Anyway, let me get started. I'm Jamie Hartman. For anybody who doesn't recognize me or know me yet, welcome to my office. This is my weekly question and answer session. And I do these every week at noon Eastern time on Thursdays. I think I had a mistake earlier where I put Fridays on there, but it's on Thursdays at noon. And I try to answer as many questions as I can get through. And I have 3 today that I want to talk about. So if you see me looking around on my screen, it's because I'm just double checking my notes. I want to make sure that I hit everything. So the first question has to do with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So Hashimoto's is a commonly experienced autoimmune disease. Some people get diagnosed with it and don't know that it's autoimmune, but it's pretty straightforward actually. And what it's happening when you have Hashimoto's is that your immune system is harming the functioning of your thyroid. So depending on how much it has progressed, you will have to take likely some thyroid replacement hormone, because the thyroid, is a critical organ for functioning in our body. But fortunately, modern science has figured out how to replace that hormone if you don't have your thyroid. Sometimes people have had their thyroid removed due to cancer or some other kind of situation, or if it's not functioning optimally. So that's kind of the long and short of what happens with Hashimoto's. And the question asked about what kind of results do I see with people who have Hashimoto's on AIP. And one of the things that often people recognize right away when they're starting working on AIP and they have Hashimoto's is that a lot of the symptoms that you experience are not directly impacted day to day by what you're eating. It's not the same as, say, somebody who has like an inflammatory bowel disease where it's like truly affecting their digestion, and they might notice it immediately if they eat something that's not right for them. Or even somebody with like a joint disorder, somebody with rheumatoid arthritis might experience increased joint pain very quickly. Whereas in Hashimoto's, the symptoms that you experience generally are because your thyroid is under functioning. And so AIP can help make help your body slow down that autoimmune response, which then would in turn make your thyroid function better, but you may not see that immediately. So again, it's a common question that people ask. The reality is that many people who have Hashimoto's and go on to AIP actually do start to feel some improvement in just their general well-being, even before their thyroid starts functioning better. A lot of times we are experiencing things that we have come to just think of as normal, that we didn't even recognize are actually our body having some kind of an autoimmune response. Some people will have forgotten what it was like when they were very young and they got out of bed and they weren't stiff and sore, or when they had regular bowel movements, or they had energy that lasted all day. And for many people who do AIP, they start to see those things happen very quickly within the first few weeks, or at least within the first, month or two. Then they start to see improvement with the way their thyroid functions, which for many people with Hashimoto's needs to be monitored, because that will then determine to their doctor that they might need to adjust that thyroid medication. Because remember, as I said at the beginning, the thyroid medication is replacing the hormone that your thyroid would be optimally producing. And if your thyroid does start to produce that hormone more, start to function more like it should, then you would need less of that medication. So one of the things that I have seen happen with people who go into AIP and they're feeling really good, that somewhere along the line they start to feel kind of rotten again in a different way, because what might be happening for some people is that they went from being maybe having thyroid levels balanced because of the medication they're taking to then falling out of balance because maybe now they've got too much thyroid hormone because their body's kicked in, their thyroid is now producing a little bit better than it was before, and they need less of their medication. So it's important to stay in touch with your doctor and keep that monitoring up so that you can make those adjustments if that's something that you need to do. It is a delicate balance to play, and it can be kind of frustrating for people when they're like, well, I'm doing something to make myself feel better, but temporarily I might feel worse. And then their temptation might be to not take their medication, to decide to cut the dose themselves. And we don't want to do that. So I want to make sure I'm really clear that I'm not saying you should stop your medication because you think that's it. You should check with your doctor. You don't want to mess around with these things. And your doctor can do that simple blood test and tell you what you really actually need to be taking in terms of that medication. I will say that one of the last things that we actually see happen for people with Hashimoto's in terms of using AIP is we actually will see last, if at all, a reduction in the antibodies in their blood test. So antibodies are a measure of when your immune system is responding to something. A lot of us have been hearing a lot about antibodies lately with the news about, the pandemic we're all dealing with, the virus that we're all dealing with. So I think that helps to kind of understand it. One of the big questions about it when we're hearing this is, will a person who's had that virus and developed antibodies against that virus continue to produce those antibodies forever? We don't know with this particular virus we're talking about. And the same is true if your body produces antibodies against some part of itself, which is what happens in an autoimmune disease. And in many autoimmune diseases, your body is reacting to it kind of in the same way, not exactly, but kind of in the same way it does to a virus. And so they can measure those antibodies. And so if the antibody level is high, that tells your doctor definitively what the diagnosis is. And for some conditions that will then guide their treatment. But the antibody level does not necessarily reflect how your body is working in that moment. So if you can kind of think about it, it makes sense when we think about the virus that we're talking about a lot. You can have a lot of antibodies to one particular virus, but get another one. You could be feeling great and have a ton of antibodies, have no antibodies. So the antibodies don't tell the doctor how you feel. They tell the doctor, if they see that antibody level going up and up and up and up, that, oh no, we're still seeing a lot of autoimmunity happening. And so it's getting worse, not better. But better doesn't necessarily mean those numbers go down. It might. It's definitely worth tracking and paying attention to, but I really always caution my clients who are going to go get to see their doctor to get their thyroid levels drawn to not get disappointed if they don't see a decrease in their antibodies. Even if they see an increase, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's reflective of what's happening right now, because there's a lag time, for that. So, but again, people with Hashimoto's will hopefully see an improvement in all of the Hashimoto's type symptoms, so that they might see that their weight will normalize if they have tended to have gained weight, more energy, less brain fog, but they'll also probably experience some other things that may not have even been on their radar as being related to Hashimoto's. So everybody's different though. There is no universal on this. And that's true. Even when you share the same diagnosis with somebody, there's a lot of variation. So those are just some of the things that I see. I hope that kind of answers the Hashimoto's question. The second question has to do with how long does an individual need to be on AIP to see any changes? And I kind of already alluded to that at the end of what I was saying in response to the first question. And that is that it varies. Even if two people have the same diagnosis, they might have completely different experiences because of a variety of factors. Think about it: age, other conditions that they're dealing with, how long they have been struggling with this health challenge, what their diet was like before versus now. For somebody whose diet was a dramatically different diet, it may take longer for them to kind of rebuild those pathways and undo any of the damage that has been done by their previous habits. So I can't give a specific number. I can throw out a few numbers that we use as kind of just like rules and guidelines, general structure. One number is 30 days. So that's the number of days that everybody really needs to commit to at a minimum. When you start the AIP elimination phase, just tell yourself, I'm doing this for sure for the next 30 days. And then when I get to the end of those 30 days, I will reevaluate. Okay. And that's it. You don't have to decide already what you're going to do at the end of those 30 days, but just that you're going to do it for a minimum of 30 days. What usually happens when people do that is that they do get to the end of those 30 days and they're starting to see something improving. They may still feel like, I haven't reached kind of what I was hoping for. In fact, that's frequently the case, but I'm starting to feel like I'm on the right track. Something is better. That something might be just simply that maybe you're sleeping a little bit better, or your bowel movements are a little bit more regular. You're just having a little bit clearer thinking, or a little bit more energy, or a little bit less of whatever kind of, maybe aches and pains you'd had. I do find that a lot of people I've seen, there's something that happens often for them at a little bit past 30 days, right about 45 days or 50 days. So I think that if you get to 30 days and you feel like there's, even if it's like, I still don't feel any better, but I'm getting used to this. I've proven by 30 days that doing AIP is not that hard. I'm kind of getting into the swing of things. Then see if you can commit to another 30 days. But again, 30 days is the minimum. There are those rare folks who are like, oh my God, in like just a few days, I started feeling fantastic. Those folks should still shoot for the full 30-day elimination before they think about reintroductions. And that's just because it takes that much time for your body to regenerate, all the cells to turn over, for you to kind of build that foundation. So whether you see immediate results or you really are kind of lagging, assume it's going to be 30 days on the elimination phase. Now, what happens if you get to those 30 days, and you even push it to like 45, because you remember Jamie said 45 days kind of seems to be a time when a lot of people, it starts to kick in, and you're still not feeling any improvement. You can keep going. When you get to about 90 days, so about 3 months, if you still, and you really don't have to wait this long, but if by 90 days you still aren't feeling like you're on the right track, if you still aren't seeing any improvement, then it's time, or maybe it was time even earlier, to do some troubleshooting. And that's where working with an AIP certified coach, some kind of a practitioner who has that experience with AIP, the training in AIP, can be super, super valuable, because troubleshooting can mean a lot of different things. When I start working with clients who are in that situation, who've been on AIP for, on the elimination phase for more than 30 days, and they tell me they still aren't feeling like there's any improvement or enough improvement to make them like want to keep going, I'm going to first look at what they are eating. That's the first thing I do for troubleshooting. I look at, what are you eating? Because it's not just about what you avoid. It's an elimination diet, but it's also an inclusion diet. It needs to be nutrient dense. So that's the first thing I do. And sometimes I can make huge improvements people can make huge improvements simply by me recognizing they're missing some key nutrients. So that can be really valuable, working with somebody with a training in nutrition and who understands the AIP, to just review what you're eating and help you figure out if maybe we're missing something that you can optimize. It can go the other way too. Sometimes people get to me and they show me what they're eating. I see their food journal and I see that they misunderstood something, or there was something they weren't reading the label of, and they've actually been eating a non-AIP food this whole time. So that's another reason to say, talk to somebody sooner rather than later. You don't have to work with someone, but if you've gone into this for 30, 60, 90 days and you're still not really feeling great, it might help to have even just one session, one consultation with somebody like myself, to review what you are eating and see if there's anything missing. And then there's deeper troubleshooting that might need to be done. I don't personally do it. I'm not a doctor, but a doctor might be able to run some additional tests, look at some kind of stool testing to see if there's an infection going on, and do some deeper, genetic testing even to see if there's something else. I don't like people to jump to that. Oh, another one is food sensitivity testing. Sometimes people will want to do that after they've done AIP for a while, and then see if that isn't kind of holding them back. Maybe there's a food they're continuing to eat that is in the AIP parameter, but that is something they're sensitive to. So those are things that can be helpful, but not everybody meets them. So I always, if I can send that message out, it doesn't have to be with me. It could be with one of my other colleagues who's a nutrition focused health coach who understands AIP, but, have somebody look at, what are you eating first? Then maybe go do some deeper testing to get to that next level. Because what if it is simply a matter of you're missing a key nutrient, and I can tell you what that is, and then you start eating it and then you're feeling fantastic. So Again, the question was just how long do you need to be on AIP to see any changes? And so I just gave a super long answer for it varies, but it does vary. The only thing I just want to reiterate, and I'll repeat this, is that if you get to the point of having been on the AIP elimination phase for 90 days and you still aren't seeing any changes, you definitely want to do some troubleshooting. Just kind of continuing to do exactly what you've been doing is not going to make any difference at that point. And certainly don't try to restrict more foods on your own. That's another mistake I see a lot of people make. They get to that kind of like 3, 4, 2, 3 months in, and they think, okay, I guess I'm still eating something I shouldn't eat. And they start restricting even further and even further and even further. And that is not usually going to lead to success. So I do not recommend that. If anything, most people need to look at what they are not eating at that point and see if they can add some other foods in. And then I think I'll just end that question by just reiterating before I go on to the last question that, the question is about any changes. This is not about like 100%, I feel fantastic, all of my symptoms are resolved. That can take a long time. We don't necessarily achieve that in any quick time. Somebody who's been sick for decades is not going to, in 30 days, reverse all of that. It just isn't going to happen. You'll hear a lot of formulas that you can use, to talk about like, well, for every year you were sick, it's going to take at least a month. I don't really buy into any of those because, again, people are so individual, but there's some truth to it. If you've been sick, like for me, for example, by the time I started AIP, I'd had Crohn's disease. I had diagnosed Crohn's disease for, I think I lost track, over 15 years at that point. So I started to feel better pretty quickly with AIP, but I couldn't expect to reverse 15 plus years of having this illness in just a short period of time. So we do have to be patient with ourselves on that. Okay, the last question is a really good one. It's how often should you have fruit when you're in the AIP elimination phase? And this person said getting mixed messages because there's a lot of confusion out there about that. You'll see everything from eat as much fruit as you want to don't eat any fruit, it's poison. And of course, neither one of those is really good advice, right? You shouldn't be afraid of fruit. You also shouldn't just eat that to an exclusion of other foods. So there is one number that does float around that is legitimate, and that is that you really should be aiming to keep the total intake of a particular type of sugar called fructose under 20 grams for the day. But you don't need to count that. I think you can drive yourself crazy. And it's hard to count because fructose, we hear fructose and we think that's the sugar in fruit, but think about where else you hear about it. High fructose corn syrup, right? So if you're not eating high fructose corn syrup, you're automatically not going to be getting a lot of fructose. Even in fruit, it's not the only sugar in it. There's a combination of of sugars, in fruit. Honey is relatively high in fructose. So is agave nectar. That's why agave nectar is not generally considered to be a good or good sweetener to use in AIP. But honey also has a fair amount of fructose in it. So that fructose number, that don't have more than 20 grams of fructose, when I'm working with clients and I'm looking at their food journals, the only time I go and like dig deeper to see and count like how much fructose they're consuming is if I know they're eating a lot of honey sweetened AIP compliant treats, because that can start to get to be too much. But they're probably also eating too much just overall sweeteners and not just that type. But I might do that calculation to see in that case. So that 20 gram number, it's out there and it's true, but you probably don't need to worry about it. And here's why. If the types of fruit that you choose are fresh, whole fruit in their natural form, like how they exist in nature, you really can consume as much of those fruits as you would like, and you'll be fine. If you are instead consuming a lot of fruit in like a dried form, so think like, dates, raisins, dried, apricots, like power balls or something where the fruit is in there and it's been dried and dehydrated and kind of made into something that, you could easily pop a bunch of them into your mouth. or smoothies. If you're doing a lot of smoothies, you can drink it really fast and get, a pretty quick, large amount without having to chew it, or juices, or even kombucha with a lot of fruit added to it. In those cases, you can start to overdo it, and you can have more than is healthy for anybody, much less somebody on AIP. Generally speaking, I tell people that they can have as much of the fruit, if it's like, taking an apple and eating an apple, or a banana and peeling a banana, as they would like, because the chewing and the consuming of that, the digesting of it, is naturally going to slow you down and keep you kind of at a regular, safe level. That's how nature intended it. And you won't overdo it if that's all you're doing. But of course, we still want to indulge in some of those other things, or we're traveling and dried fruits are really appealing. So how much can you have? 2 to 5 servings per day is generally where you want to land with fruit. So that's a kind of a wide range. And sometimes we wonder, well, how big is a serving? So, that does vary, but I think of an apple as a serving, no matter how big the apple is, because there's so much fiber in there. It's good for you. So great big apple, that's a serving. You can have an apple every day, keep the doctor away. You can also have a cup of blueberries. You could have both of those in a day, no problem. You could also have a banana. You'd still fit into that 2 to 5 range. Now, if instead of that, you're getting a whole bag of dried mango slices from Costco and thinking about eating that, you could easily tip over. To give you a little context, so the way that I direct this to my clients is that I don't want them to limit. I really don't like limiting anything, honestly. So what I say instead to them is that I want you to be eating a certain amount of fruits and vegetables. I have parameters that I lay out. They're not 100% the same for everybody, but there's some general guidelines. But I want half of that to come from green things. So that's going to be your vegetables. And then the other half should be other colors. And that can include fruit. So if it's a brightly colored fruit, it's got a lot of extra micronutrients, phytonutrients on top of that sugar that's in it, as well as the fiber, of course, that's in there. So you're getting mixed messages because there's a lot of different ways to explain that. And I think people get really hung up on the limiting idea of it. And I like to instead, when I'm really working with people and coaching them in their real life, is instead of having to think about, well, how much can I have and limit that, put a maximum on it. It's like, well, what can you eat that will support you? So you can eat as much fresh fruit as you would like, as long as you're also in the day eating those other things you might not naturally be drawn towards. So, we only have so much stomach capacity and desire to spend eating, but if you're eating everything in a natural state that's going to slow you down, you're probably not going to overdo anything. So feel free to have all the fruit you want if it's in that natural form. Okay, those were the 3 questions that were submitted this week. So I hope that's helpful for the people who submitted them and for anyone else who might have watched this. If you have a question that you would like me to answer, please let me know. I will put the link for how to submit questions in the comments below for future sessions. And I look forward to speaking with you all again next week. Take care.